It was late, sometime after midnight, and the house was still. I was sitting in the dark, staring out the window, trying to make sense of the night sky. There had been a light, a flash, a single blinding pulse that cut through the quiet countryside, casting long shadows across the fields before vanishing as quickly as it had come. I didn't know what it was. I didn't know if I had actually seen it or if it was something my tired mind had conjured, but the light, it had been so real. The air outside was thick with fog. It clung to the ground in slow-moving tendrils, swallowing up the trees and the road. I tried to shake the feeling that something was off, something was wrong. But it lingered, that sense of being watched, of something just out of sight. And then came the knock. 3 slow, deliberate raps on the front door. I hadn't been expecting anyone. Not at this hour, not out here. I sat frozen in my chair for what felt like an eternity, the sound of my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. The knock came again, softer this time, but insistent, as though the person on the other side already knew I was there, waiting. I rose from the chair, my legs heavy and unsteady. Each step felt like I was wading through thick air, my breath coming in shallow gasps as I reached the door and pulled it open. 3 men stood there on the porch. All of them wore black suits and black hats, and their faces were pale, too pale. Their features were indistinct, like a photograph, slightly out of focus. They didn't smile. They didn't speak. They just stood there watching me with eyes that seemed too dark, too hollow, as if they weren't looking at me at all, but at something behind me, or through me. "May we come in?" one of them asked, though his lips barely moved. His voice was quiet, flat, almost mechanical. It wasn't a request. It was an inevitability. I stepped aside without thinking, as if some unseen force had taken control of my body. They moved past me, silent as shadows, and took their place in my living room, standing there like statues, their hands clasped in front of them. The air in the room grew colder, heavier. Something hung between us, an unspoken tension that pressed against my chest. "We are here to talk about the incident," the man in the center said, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. "Incident?" "The light," he said simply. "What you saw." I opened my mouth to deny it, to say I didn't know what he was talking about, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, my head moving on its own as if compelled by some invisible force. "What you saw," he continued, "was not meant for you. It does not exist." "But I began, my voice faltering as I tried to recall the details, tried to remember exactly what I had seen. The light had been there, hadn't it? The object, the strange shapes shifting in the sky. But now, as I stood there in front of these men, it all seemed hazy, like a dream half remembered upon waking. "It is important," the man said, his eyes never leaving mine, "that you forget." The room seemed to grow darker around them, the shadows deepening. My thoughts felt muddled, confused, like someone had reached into my mind and scrambled them. I blinked, trying to focus. But the men, were they still there? Had they ever been there? I could feel their presence, but when I looked directly at them, they seemed to flicker, like an old television screen losing signal. "You will not speak of this," the man on the left said. His voice was like a low hum, almost blending into the silence. "It is not safe." "Not safe?" I asked, though I wasn't sure if I had spoken aloud or if the question had remained trapped inside my head. The men said nothing. They simply stared, their eyes fixed on me, their faces expressionless, unreadable. And then, as quickly as they had arrived, they turned and left. I didn't hear the door open. I didn't hear their footsteps fade. One moment they were there, and the next, they were gone, swallowed up by the fog outside. I stood there in the empty living room, my heart still pounding, my hands trembling. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been taken from me, something important, something I could no longer remember. The light, the object, the men. It all felt distant now, like a fading memory from a dream that was slipping through my fingers no matter how hard I tried to hold on. I walked to the window and looked out into the fog. The night was still, silent, as if nothing had ever disturbed it. But deep down, I knew something had changed. I could feel it in the air, in the quiet hum that lingered just out of earshot. The light, the men, it was all connected somehow, but the connection was frayed, out of reach. I don't know how long I stood there, staring into the night, but when I finally turned away, I couldn't remember why I had been standing there in the first place.